everybody. Happy Halloween. Well, I know that Halloween was yesterday, but I hope you had a wonderful, spooky, interesting Halloween. I've seen some amazing costumes, some very creative costumes out last night. And guess what? My sisters had some very creative costumes. One of my so I have three sisters. One of them was Lorax, the other was Roxanne from the Goofy movie, and then my other sister was Princess Fiona from Shrek. And they all looked amazing. These were very creative costumes, like they turned out great. I have a collage of those costumes on my Facebook account. You can actually visit my Facebook page. It's linked in the description of this channel. And I want to see what you're wearing. Show me what you wore for Halloween. I'm interested to see because I seen a lot of creative costumes out last night. Before we get into today's topic, the first thing that I want to start off by saying is last night I uploaded a video, and in the video I spoke about a phenomenon and a group of people. And I want to apologize because in that video, I used language that I felt was insensitive. And that language was that I said that the sovereign citizen movement, although I don't sympathize with it or agree with it, I described it as strange and weird. And that was something that I should not have done. It came from a place of ignorance. And again, although I must reiterate, I don't sympathize or agree with the ideology of the sovereign citizen movement, but I want my channel to be a place where that there is respectful debate. And I wasn't respectful when I called the people who identify as the SCs as weird and strange. Again, that showed that I was ill informed and not educated. As you can see, when I was speaking on that topic, I kind of drew a blank and I was thinking about Robin Hooding, and it didn't connect because my mind was like, okay, this is a kind of Robin Hooding. And then I couldn't explain myself. And then I said, okay, let me go back and to Wikipedia. Let me see what this really is. And so I read it on screen. And then I remembered, okay, so I often see that these people who believe that are being stopped by law enforcement and they don't have license plates on their car. And so, again, I want to apologize. I was insensitive when I made the statement and I articulated that the people who identify as SCs are weird. I should not have done that. That's insensitive. And for that, I apologize. Now, let's get into today's topic. Today's topic is, should Black America have its own version of the Anti-Defamation League? And I would argue yes. I think that Black America should have our own version of the Anti-Defamation League. That's not to say that there are not any amazing NGOs and organizations in the United States that are doing amazing work. So in my video last night, I raised the question, where is the NAACP when there are individual instances of anti-Black racism happening? And that was not shade or a dig on the NAACP. Let me be clear. The NAACP, it does amazing work. It helps Black youth with scholarships, awards, internships. It is leading the charge on voting rights. It is also engaged in strategic litigation. And so there is several cases that the NAACP is currently signed on. And what I feel that the NAACP is doing, the reason why it's signed on to these cases is because it feels that it's going to have a strategic impact across America in the Black American communities. And that is amazing work. That is, they deserve their flowers for doing that. And so I don't speak ill on the NAACP. On the other hand, I think what we need, of course, in the United States is a center like the Anti-Defamation League that specifically is tasked with tackling, investigating, researching anti-Black racism. Online, offline, in the communities, in institutions, we understand that there is systemic racism, institutional racism. This racism could be direct in the form of direct discrimination. It can also be indirect in the form of policies that look neutral on its face but have a disparate impact on Black communities. And so I think that we definitely need an organization that is specifically tasked with handling, contending with, researching, investigating anti-Black racism. And so I want to share the framework that the Anti-Defamation League is using. And before I do that, I want to say that this video is not insensitive to the victims, the men, women, and children that are uh, losing their lives in countries that are involved in conflict with Israel. We do understand that when there's conflict, innocent lives are being lost. And this isn't insensitive to that. As you know, I have to reiterate before I get into this is that I'm a person that I am anti-war. I'm anti-war on both sides. So I don't take a position. I don't support a side. I believe that the children's right should be respected. So the rights of the child, the woman's rights should be respected as well. And of course, the rights of men, because men in these, a lot of men in these situations are victims as well. And they have nothing to do on both sides. They have nothing to do with the conflict. So again, I'm anti-war, and I'm looking at this framework from the amazing work that the Anti-Defamation League is doing for Jewish people. And so let's get into that. So the Anti-Defamation League, what they have is a Center for Technology and Society. And what is that? So that center is research driven, and what it does is it works to end the proliferation of anti-Semitism in all its forms and hate and harassment online. Now, I could just think, if you've been following my story, you know that I had to actually delete my Twitter X account, because I have been harassed by anti-Black men online. And so they are anti-Black men. They are people who are incels, and these men are connected to law enforcement because you can't complain against them. So that's how I know that there is a connection to law enforcement, because we know that there is a lot of anti-Black racism and anti-Black ideology within intelligence agencies and law enforcement excuse me, departments. And so just imagine if that Black America had a Center for Technology and Society, we wouldn't be going through what we're going through online. I definitely wouldn't be going through it. And so, if we had a center like that, then I probably would still have my Twitter X account, and I would have some support backing me to say that that behavior that I had experienced online was wrong. But because we understand that there is a systemic and institutional component to anti-black hate. So, in other words, anti-black hate is at a institutional and systemic level. It's difficult for, well, I won't say that it's difficult. Is it difficult? Maybe it's arduous. Okay, it's arduous. It's arduous. It's arduous for organizations who haven't researched anti-black hate and the nuances of it to understand when it's happening and to put it into it. Okay, so what else does this center, like what else does it do, right? So what their team does is it partners with industry, civil society, government, and communities to expose, excuse me, harms, threat. So they're exposing harms and they're holding tech companies accountable and fighting for justice on online spaces. Okay, so just think about it. If, as a Black American, I had an institution or a center like the Anti-Defamation-League in my corner, holding it down for me, then I wouldn't had like there wouldn't been a reason for me to delete my Twitter X account. I would have still been able to actually have that social media platform. And this demonstrates nationally and internationally that Black Americans, we still are not protected. We're still not protected. And it's unfortunate that we're not protected internationally and that frameworks that are in place currently abroad aren't addressing these issues with Black Americans in mind. And so there is more work that the Anti-Defamation-League is doing. So, for example, it's fighting anti Semitism, it's combating extremism, it's disrupting, to reiterate, online hate speech and harassment, it's protecting online civil rights, and it's challenging bias. Who doesn't need an organization that's going to serve their interests like that? We need something like that in the Black American community. We need a center that is going to fight anti-Black racism. We need a center that is going to combat excuse me, domestic extremism against the Black American community. We've seen so many cases of this in the United States. We need a center that is going to protect civil rights. And yes, we do have organizations that are leading the way, but not enough organizations are specifically tasked with combating anti-Black racism. And that's unfortunate. That is an unfortunate reality. What the Anti-Defamation League also has is the Center for Anti-Semitism Research. And so what this center does is it advances the global field of anti-Semitism research. Do you see? It's at a global level, not just a domestic level, it's global. seeking answers to the questions foundational to understanding, preventing, and reducing anti Semitism. So I think that we could all agree that there is anti Black racism against Black Americans is quite different from any other type of xenophobia or being othered, right? Because when we think deeply on it, there is Black Americans right now, we are descendants of slaves. So we were brought here against our own volition to work without any without we were brought here to work. We didn't get paid. We weren't If we said no, if our ancestors said no, then what happened was that they were punished severely. And because of that, there is a different dynamic between Black Americans and white Americans. And this dynamic is quite different from any other African communities that are in the United States or that may be abroad. So, for example, I live in Belfast, and most of the African communities, unless they're from South Africa, they haven't had a contentious dynamic like I have experienced in the United States. They haven't had a dynamic like that or an experience like that. So our lived experiences is different. And the experiences that they have with white America is different from the experiences that I've had with white America. And that's not to say, ladies and gentlemen, let's can we be fair? Let's be fair. I will reiterate, I said this in a video before. I do not hate white people. And I often treat people the way that they treat me. So if you treat me nice and if you treat me like a person, you treat me like a human being, I'm going to treat you the same way. If you befriend me, I don't care what race you are. I'm going to befriend you. If you have my back, I'm going to have your back. If you are respectful to me, I'm going to be respectful to you. But what I've noticed is that there is an ideology that is prevalent here in Europe and a couple of the countries that I've been to, that I'm under the impression that they're being instructed to isolate and to dislike Black Americans. I don't know who is doing that. I have my opinion on that, and I will talk about that another time. But I think that this is very divisive. It is dangerous rhetoric, and it splits communities apart. And if it's a person in leadership that's doing that, I would question why they are still in that position. And my only guess is that they have reward power, meaning that they can give incentives to people who go against Black Americans who are speaking out against racism. That's just my opinion. What else? So we're going to go back to the framework of the ADL. And what else are they doing? So they have the Center on Extremism. This center is doing amazing work. So what do? They track extremist trends, ideologies, and groups across the ideological spectrum. Their staff, and so they have staff, they have investigators, analysts, researchers, and technical experts strategically monitoring and exposing and, of course, disrupting these kinds of threats. Exactly what we need in the United States. I don't know any NGO nationally that is doing this for Black Americans. What often happens, ladies and gentlemen, with our NGOs, and I understand our organizations and NGOs, and I do understand that they have a workload. They're doing a lot of work and they're doing what they can, right? But what I've noticed is that the only cases that you will see. Okay, let me think about before I say this. Sometimes you won't see some of these organizations coming out in support of Black victims unless those stories are headlines in the media. And I can see why that is, because there is a level of legitimacy to those incidents, but we really need to think about that those incidents are just the tip of the iceberg. Let's think about what's below the water. And we need to think about victims who don't have celebrity, victims who don't have publicity, victims who don't have large followerships. And I think there should be a focus on that. There should be a focus on protecting victims like that. And I think that that is what Anti-Defamation League is doing. And as an example, I'll give you an example of that. Okay, here it is. The ADL, what they did was they launched uh, Ronald, I think, please, I'm going to really butcher this name and I apologize, but Ronald Bourbon. So they launched the Ronald Bourbon Center to Combat Anti-Semitism in Education. And when we think about that, so how they're doing that is they're educating and universities, colleges, high schools, etc., and teaching them to identify anti-Semitism. So how to identify it, what are the signs of anti-Semitism? What are the signs of a victim, a Jewish person who is being impacted by anti-Semitism? How to identify that. They're teaching them how to identify perpetrators who are actually circulating and putting that into motion and propagating anti-Semitism in educational settings. They're teaching educational institutions on, what to do, what not to do, and the best course of action to take. And we don't have institutions or centers like this for Black America. We don't have it in the United States. We don't have it nationally, let alone internationally, or we don't have it internationally, let alone nationally. We don't have it. And reflecting on it deeply, I think it's something that is necessary. It's necessary. It's absolutely necessary. And the reason why it's necessary, because again, I go back to, let's, to refer back to what I was saying, is that sometimes anti-Black racism could be indirect. So you have micro invalidations that people are trying to push onto you. You have microaggressions. You have micro insults that is taking place. And in many instances, people who don't have a connection to Black Americans or descendants of slaves, right? If they don't understand that sensitive history and what descendants of slaves went through during that period and what they went through, what our ancestors went through during the Jim Crow period. If there's not enough research and education around these issues, then it can be quite difficult today to identify acts that are reminiscent of the Jim Crow period. It can be difficult to identify acts that are reminiscent of the slavery period that our ancestors went through. And so when Black Americans are speaking about their experience, there is a level of injustice, testimonial injustice there when we're speaking about our experiences in a person who is not educated on our history, right? Because we're not being treated as a person as the speaker. We're not being treated as a speaker who knows and understands anti-Black racism. And so the hearer, they're not actually listening and they're not actually taking in that what we're telling them is that these are acts of anti-Black racism that is reminiscent of these dreadful periods in time, and why it's important to put an end to it and to stop it, or to speak out about it. Ladies and gentlemen, you wouldn't believe how many people, how many organizations I've gone to and I say, hey, like this is happening. And I think that it's important that we speak out about it because I think that it can impact not only me, but other people. And I've just been ignored. So I think we need to think critically on this. What do you think? Do you think that Black Americans need an institution like the Anti-Defamation-League? Or do you think that there are already enough institutions in the United States to protect Black Americans? Do you think that right now that the Anti-Defamation-League is doing amazing work? I do. Do you think that that framework should be replicated? I certainly do. I want to hear your opinions on this and what you think about it because all opinions matter. And I want to listen to, and I want to read your comments and I want to know what you're thinking on this. So this video has gone on long enough. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like it, and share it. And I look forward to talking to you next time. Bye bye.